She commanded influence, wealth, and authority, but what eluded her was humility, a deficit that ultimately confronted her when the man she had dismissed subtly withdrew a staggering $2 billion from her grasp. Charleston's pervasive humidity hadn't lessened, even with the gentle current drifting from the Ashley River. The estate, once a Civil War-era plantation now transformed into an opulent event venue, shimmered under the morning sun, a spectacle of pristine white columns and precisely manicured hedges. Inside, crystal champagne flutes chimed softly, and smooth jazz mingled with hushed conversations of affluence and heritage. Clarissa Van Duren stood gracefully near the main veranda, a light blue silk gown accentuating her slender form. One hand lightly held a mimosa, the other rested elegantly at her waist as if posed for a portrait. Her expression remained largely unaltered, poised, composed, a hint of weariness. She had just concluded a 20-minute address on preserving Southern grace through thoughtful redevelopment. The applause was resounding, as was the admiration. She excelled at this. Clarissa, a woman in a sharp beige pantsuit, remarked, "There's someone you absolutely must meet. He's involved in the financing for the new Allendale initiative." Without waiting for her response, the woman signaled someone over. He approached with quiet assurance, devoid of an entourage or ostentatious timepiece, just a serene, self-possessed presence. He wore a charcoal sport coat, no tie, and well-worn brown leather shoes that had evidently traveled more extensively than most of the attendees combined. "This is Mr. Lennox Bramble," the woman announced. "He's been collaborating closely with the team on community financing, a significant element of the endeavor." Clarissa's gaze flickered over him swiftly, akin to a quick assessment of a lingering valet. She offered a faint, strange smile, then set her mimosa down. Lennox extended his hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Van Duren." Her smile tightened. "I don't shake hands with staff." She uttered the words without a flicker of an eyelid, her tone devoid of sharpness, simply stating a matter of fact, as if this protocol had served her well at countless previous gatherings. Lennox kept his hand extended for a fleeting half-second longer, then let it fall gently. "Of course," he responded with a quiet nod of acknowledgement. The woman positioned between them shifted uncomfortably, emitting a faint dry chuckle, as if to disperse the palpable awkwardness. But Lennox didn't linger. He turned, thanked her for the introduction, and departed without raising his voice, without creating a scene. Clarissa turned back to her mimosa. "People forget these events aren't for them," she murmured. "They're fortunate to be here." It could have ended there, another fleeting moment in a life filled with them. Yet merely 10 feet away, someone else had witnessed the entire exchange. Tilda Renshaw, a journalist for the Post and Courier, present to cover the development push for a Sunday feature. She had spent over a decade reporting on this caliber of wealth and had gleaned a crucial insight. Genuine narratives don't clamor, they murmur. One merely needs to listen closely enough. Near the side garden, Lennox retrieved his phone. He didn't check notifications. He opened his contacts, selected a name labeled Consolidation Lead, Gray, and raised the phone to his ear. "Yeah," he said, "it's me. Initiate the unwind." There was a brief silence, then a voice on the other end. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain," Lennox affirmed. "Withdraw everything discreetly." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, walking towards the gravel driveway without a backward glance. The sun illuminated his face as he passed the hedges, and he exhaled slowly, calmly yet decisively. He hadn't needed to raise his voice, but a shift had already begun behind the walls of that flawless estate, and by the time anyone realized, it would be irreversible. By the time most of the brunch guests were checking their phones again, Lennox Bramble was already 3 miles distant, driving a silver 2014 Lincoln MKZ with serene air conditioning and a worn baseball cap tucked between the seats. The estate was behind him, yet Clarissa Van Duren's words lingered in the back seat as if unfinished with him. He didn't play music, he didn't call a friend. He simply reflected intently. This wasn't the first instance someone like Clarissa had judged him prematurely, but this time it wasn't merely personal, it was strategic. That estate, those champagne flutes, the discourses on revitalization and Southern advancement, they were insubstantial without financial backing, and at this moment he was the financial backing. That handshake wasn't about propriety. It was about recognition, and she had failed the assessment before she even knew one existed. At a traffic light on Folly Road, Lennox contacted Amira Drennan, his operations director at Bramble and Gray. "Hey," he began, "flag anything connected to Van Duren Holdings. I want it all scrutinized. Commitments, wire transfers, land agreements, options, pending closings. If it's linked to her group, I want it frozen." Amira didn't pose questions. "Understood." He ended the call and gazed out the window. A group of teenagers waited to cross the street. One wore a t-shirt emblazoned with the word respect in bold red letters. It caused Lennox to inhale through his nose, a little more profoundly than usual. He wasn't vindictive, he didn't shout or rush. He acted with precision. That was how he had built his company in the first place. Deliberate actions, keen observation, no histrionics. The next morning, as Clarissa was being chauffeured to a luncheon in Bluffton, 2 contract managers at First Carolina Trust received automated notifications that 6 pending land transfers were under review. No explanation, merely a quiet hold. By 2 p.m., one of Clarissa's junior advisors, a 30-something named Barrett Leach with slicked back hair and a mind that raced faster than his words, began circulating emails, attempting to ascertain the situation. Nothing immediate came back. Meanwhile, back at Bramble and Gray's office in downtown Savannah, Amira sat at her desk with 4 tabs open: Van Duren Holdings public filings, the Allendale redevelopment site plans, a draft press release they had never utilized, and an internal memo Lennox had once titled, "Money is not an apology." She scrolled through it again, highlighting a sentence he had penned years ago after a banking partner withdrew from a project due to public perception issues in a black neighborhood. "If you don't acknowledge people, you don't deserve to profit from them." She picked up the phone. "Confirm freeze on all active capital deployment involving Van Duren Holdings. Notify legal. Full audit commences tomorrow." Elsewhere in Beaufort, a county liaison named Harold Fenwick was fielding a call from Clarissa's project coordinator. "I don't have any new updates," he said, slightly irritated. "Actually, we were instructed to halt coordination with the private funding side until further notice." The voice on the other end faltered. "Wait, by whom?" Harold shifted the phone. "We didn't get a name, just the principal financier's office. Look, I don't want to get caught in the middle, but you all might want to contact your people." It wasn't long before Clarissa's inner circle began whispering. Something was amiss. And when capital shifts first, people feel it. She just didn't comprehend the extent of its reach. But she was about to discover that in venues constructed on influence, silence permeates faster than sound and inflicts a far greater impact. Before the name Bramble and Gray appeared on contracts and legal documents throughout the Southeast, before Lennox Bramble secured a seat at tables people like Clarissa deemed elite, he was simply a boy from Decatur, Georgia, nurtured by his aunt and 2 uncles in a modest 2-bedroom residence tucked behind a warehouse. He spoke little in school. Teachers described him as reserved but astute. He would mend malfunctioning calculators just to see if he could, and by 15 he was selling refurbished VCRs. His aunt held 2 jobs, night nurse and caterer, and she imparted to him that silence wasn't a weakness, it was a tactic. His initial legitimate employment involved washing rental cars at a budget lot off Memorial Drive. By 22 he was a shift supervisor with $6,000 in savings and an unyielding resolve. At night he pursued business courses at Georgia State, paying tuition in cash 1 semester at a time. The narrative didn't ignite with a stroke of luck or a wealthy mentor. It progressed laboriously, years of revitalizing undervalued properties, collaborating directly with contractors, discerning where cities preferred to conceal their future zoning blueprints. Lennox constructed Bramble and Gray from a single foreclosure in Macon and a meticulously renovated triplex in Columbia. What distinguished him wasn't what he procured but where and why. He didn't pursue what the market labeled hot. He ventured where communities had been overlooked and where capital had consciously avoided for decades. Then he forged enduring alliances, restoration agreements, owner equity distributions, and reinvestment clauses. To the outside world he was simply another investor, but in the neighborhoods he financed they called him the one who listened. In 2016, when a chemical fire displaced over 40 families in Augusta, it was Lennox who appeared, without media, no donation ceremony, no PR agency, just architects, builders, and temporary housing units. He didn't merely issue checks, he followed through. The capital arrived gradually at first, but it arrived. Individuals who had been ignored for years began investing. Churches partnered with him. Local credit unions trusted his assurance more than some banks. And by the time the mayor of Pensacola solicited his backing for a community health center, Lennox Bramble's name had transitioned from unknown to revered, quietly. He rarely altered his attire. Charcoal jackets, well-worn shoes, understated ties when necessary. People often mistook him for an assistant, staff, or a misplaced relative in the wrong room. That didn't perturb him. It affirmed he was precisely where he needed to be. Amira Drennan, his trusted confidant, used to quip, "You're the specter of capital. You enter a room and no one realizes they've just been assessed." But he didn't perceive himself as a titan. He saw himself as a reflection. The Charleston Agreement represented the largest commitment his firm had undertaken thus far. $2 billion dispersed across 6 counties, targeting abandoned mills, condemned housing, and deteriorating main streets. It wasn't solely about structures. It was about substantiating a principle. You don't have to obliterate history to mend what it shattered. And yet, Clarissa Van Duren, the very individual who championed heritage, couldn't meet his gaze or offer her hand. That conveyed everything he needed to understand. Lennox wasn't incensed, he wasn't wounded. He was simply finished witnessing individuals flaunt philanthropy like perfume, hoping the aroma would mask their entitlement. Finished devoting his time to those who only recognized authority when it mirrored their own appearance. Finished fabricating excuses for inherited arrogance. His withdrawal wasn't retribution. It was alignment, a quiet recalibration of his existing convictions. Money cannot alter one's character, but it certainly can cease to reward it. But while Lennox progressed without her, Clarissa was just beginning to experience the chilling sensation of being left behind. Clarissa Van Duren did not grow up desiring anything. Not affection, not acknowledgement, not wealth. Everything was presented to her before she voiced a request, meticulously arranged and safeguarded. The Van Duren family estate sprawled across nearly 400 acres of South Carolina's most coveted coastal land, complete with equines, a vineyard, and a private sanctuary. Her father, Leighton Van Duren, owned half of the state's oldest land brokerage firm, and her mother presided over silent auctions for museum wings and opera galas as if they were casual Sunday brunches. Clarissa's childhood was the kind only depicted in glossy magazines or antique Southern portraits. Piano lessons at 6, etiquette instruction at 7, legacy school by 9. She quickly learned that gifts could serve as currency, and hers held considerable value in circles that didn't request resumes. Her smile, impeccable, rehearsed, perpetually ready for the lens even in its absence, was renowned. People spoke of her charm, but what they truly implied was control. She could captivate an assembly with a mere nod, bestow commendation without genuine warmth, and leave you feeling simultaneously flattered and slightly inferior. By 28 she was vice chair of the family foundation. By 32 she launched her own property trust, concentrating on redevelopment with tradition, a phrase she trademarked. It appeared charitable on paper, but in reality, Clarissa had a propensity for arriving in neglected communities with a vision that scarcely considered the existing residents. Historic theaters transformed into boutique event spaces. Retired school buildings became luxurious rental units. The Van Duren brand imparted a veneer of refinement to everything, though not always genuine purpose. Still, the press adored her. Southern grace, northern efficiency, one magazine dubbed her. She moderated discussions, presented at conferences, posed for photographs with scholarship recipients whose names she couldn't recall, and it succeeded. Her reputation was unblemished, controlled. She viewed herself as someone who assisted, not directly of course. Clarissa didn't frequent living rooms or attend zoning board meetings, but through her concepts, her discerning taste, her vision, that was how she effected change. So when she declared, "I don't shake hands with staff," it wasn't even intended as an affront. To her it was merely protocol, unnecessary contact, a boundary that preserved an aura of cleanliness. She didn't recognize Lennox Bramble because she wasn't attempting to. In her realm, significant individuals were introduced with pomp, their names accompanied by buzz, titles, or distinguished lineage. But Lennox hadn't conformed to the image. No precisely tailored pinstripe, no refined inflection, no indicator that proclaimed, "Someone I need to impress." That was her miscalculation. Back at her home office in Bluffton the next day, Clarissa sat at her custom glass desk, a lacquered fingernail tapping against a hard copy of the Allendale proposal. Her team was tardy for a Zoom debrief, and Barrett Leach had sent another message. "We've got some red flags on the contracts. Might be worth reviewing." She dismissed it. "Barrett always panics before lunch," she muttered. But when the call finally commenced, the atmosphere was different. "The title company says 2 parcels are under dispute now," someone stated, "and our lender flagged missing paperwork." Clarissa waved her hand dismissively at the camera. "Sort it. That's what I pay you all for." No one resisted yet, but she sensed something tighten, not in the call but in the silence after the meeting. She stood at her office window, gazing out at the marshland behind her property. All the resources at her disposal, yet no answers. She wasn't accustomed to that. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her calendar, then her messages, then her call log. Nothing obvious, nothing traceable. For a fleeting moment she wondered, could it have been that man? But the thought was ephemeral, it made no sense. If he were truly important, someone would have informed her. If he possessed power, he wouldn't have been standing there alone, awaiting an introduction like a volunteer. But silence possesses a way of infiltrating confidence, and this time, it was already within her domain, reordering things she considered inviolable. Monday morning commenced like most for Clarissa Van Duren. Green smoothie, 3-mile run, and an inbox that resembled a command center more than a communication tool. Her assistant, Renee, had already marked several minor issues in bold red. Clarissa barely scanned them. Most things in her world were rectifiable with the appropriate tone, the right legal counsel, or the correct name on the CC line. But today the messages weren't vanishing as they usually did. They were accumulating. At 9:17 a.m., an alert arrived from Landmark Title Group, subject line, "Request for verification, pending Allendale transfer." At 9:31, the county clerk's office in Jasper County contacted Clarissa's team to state they had been instructed to halt 3 filings. No explanation. By 10:12 a.m., a major regional lender flagged her account with a pending review tag. That one seized her attention. "What in hell is transpiring?" she exclaimed aloud, glancing over her monitor. Barrett Leach was already halfway to her office, clutching a legal pad and appearing winded, as if he had sprinted down the corridor from legal. "They're reporting the project's financial cornerstone is withdrawing," he announced, not even waiting for her to inquire which project. "Allendale, Barnwell, possibly even Denmark. Anyone linked to the regional restoration pool." Clarissa reclined in her chair. "Who is the cornerstone?" Barrett blinked. "You don't know." "I wouldn't be asking if I did." He hesitated, then flipped a page on his pad. "Bramble and Gray. Lennox Bramble's firm." She froze. That name. That instant. The man. The handshake. The words. Her initial reaction wasn't guilt. It was disbelief. "He's the financier?" Clarissa rose, walked to the window and stared out as if the trees could offer clarification. "He didn't appear." Barrett raised an eyebrow. "Like someone with $2 billion in contracts riding on his signature." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for her phone, scrolling through the guest list from the Charleston brunch. His name wasn't even highlighted. No assistant had flagged it. No one had prepared her. "Why wasn't I informed who he was?" she snapped. Barrett sighed. "He was listed in the donor architecture team, not the high-profile section. Low-key. He doesn't engage with the press. We just didn't." "Didn't what, Barrett?" "Didn't think you required a personal briefing on everyone in the room." Clarissa slowly set the phone down, her expression neutral again, but her breathing slightly uneven. By noon, a second wave of calls arrived, this time from her associates, individuals she had been aligned with for years. The tone was polite but distant. "Just checking in to see if there's been any alteration to the funding structure on the Van Duren parcels. Clarissa, can we verify the status of your financial backing before our next site visit? Hi, just overheard a whisper that one of the capital firms is realigning. Should we be concerned?" She told them what she could, that there was no issue, that she would manage it, that everything was proceeding as anticipated. But internally something felt as though it were fraying. Because if Lennox was withdrawing and doing so with such stealth, there was no press to manipulate, no declaration to dispute, no narrative to reclaim. It was simply absence, silent disengagement. Clarissa did not cope well with absence. She controlled narratives, curated partnerships, maintained image. But here was a man who had uttered not a word, yet every room she was supposed to dominate now felt as though someone else held the floor. By 3 p.m. Ant, one of her private bankers, finally replied, "Due to current flux in contractual support, we're adjusting collateral requirements for ongoing land acquisition. We'll reach out again after further internal review." Clarissa let the phone drop onto her desk as if it had seared her hand. She stood again, straightened her shoulders and softly murmured to herself, "Fine. He desires to play quiet. Let's see who whispers louder." But when someone commands the capital in the silence, it doesn't. By Tuesday morning, Clarissa's office felt like a dam on the verge of rupture. The air conditioning hummed steadily, but the tension was dense enough to suffocate. Her legal advisor, Pam Huxley, flew in from Charlotte without awaiting a formal invitation. She brought printed spreadsheets, a weary countenance and zero tolerance for euphemisms. "We have a conflagration," Pam declared the moment she took a seat, "and it's spreading." Clarissa sipped black coffee and didn't look up. "We've managed worse." Pam leaned forward. "Not like this. This isn't public yet, but it's quietly collapsing beneath your feet. The financiers who hadn't even signed yet are withdrawing. Some won't even take our calls." Clarissa's face remained composed, but her hand tapped against the ceramic mug, 3 soft clicks, repeatedly. "What does he desire?" she finally asked. Pam appeared bewildered. "Who?" "Lennox Bramble. What's he attempting to leverage?" Pam hesitated. "Clarissa, he isn't asking for anything. That's the crux of the issue. There's no negotiation, just silence." Clarissa disliked that response. She was accustomed to leverage, threats, demands, compromises. If someone wanted something, you could eventually concede it and move on. But when someone desires nothing, you cannot anticipate their next move. You cannot control it. You cannot rectify it. Barrett slipped into the office mid-conversation, visibly perspiring through his button-down. "Clarissa, you might wish to see this." He pulled out his tablet and tapped a few times before holding it up. "The Post and Courier's business section is preparing a piece. Nothing posted yet, but Tilda Renshaw just emailed our PR line, requesting a comment." Clarissa's jaw clenched just briefly. "What's she writing?" Working title says, "Van Duren's Southern expansion faces financial reconsideration amid values conflict." Doesn't mention Bramble's name directly, but everyone in the room will know. She seized the tablet, scanned it rapidly, her eyes sharp, then tossed it onto her desk. "We respond now. Contact Elliott Communications. I want a draft prepared by 5. Pam shook her head. "That will only exacerbate the situation. You're treating this like a scandal. It's not. It's a correction. The individuals who once believed in you, they're no longer certain they do." Clarissa turned to the window again. Outside, 2 landscapers meticulously trimmed the hedges lining her driveway. Perfect uniforms, precise lines, order. Yet inside this glass and steel office, nothing felt contained. "I want a meeting with him," she declared abruptly. Pam frowned. "With Bramble?" "Yes, in person." Barrett coughed. "That might not be advisable." "I don't care," she stated. "Schedule it. I need to speak to him directly." Pam remained silent, but her eyes conveyed what she didn't utter. "You're not accustomed to being told no, and that is precisely what is coming." Clarissa had forged a career on appearing composed, in control, graceful under duress. But this was different. The pressure wasn't from the press or investors. It was from a solitary moment, 4 seconds at a brunch, where she had exposed something she believed she had concealed more effectively. She had uttered something she had likely said 100 times before, but this time it resonated because this time the man she dismissed didn't require her. He didn't need her capital, her approval, or her connections. In fact, she needed his. That realization struck harder than she anticipated. At 6:22 p.m., Barrett re-entered her office, holding his phone. "He agreed." Clarissa looked up. "Lennox Bramble," he stated. "He'll meet. 1 hour. Thursday. His office in Savannah." She didn't inquire how they convinced him. She simply nodded and sat down at her desk, smoothing the skirt of her navy blue suit and closing her laptop. "Prepare me a comprehensive dossier. I wish to know everything about him before I enter that door." But even the most exhaustive dossier wouldn't prepare her for the sensation of standing before someone whose silence she had already profoundly underestimated. Tilda Renshaw had been covering the Charleston beat for nearly 13 years, long enough to sense when something was amiss, even if no one spoke a word. She wasn't flashy, no national bylines, no podcast deals, just a well-used notebook, a keen intuition, and a network of sources who trusted her more than their own press officers. She had been at the brunch that Saturday, technically off-duty, sipping diluted mimosas and gathering atmosphere for a Sunday piece on philanthropic redevelopment. She wasn't even supposed to be taking notes, but she observed the moment. The swift handshake refusal, the blunt delivery of "I don't shake hands with staff," and the expression on the man's face. Not angry, not offended, just still, as if something had been appraised and found wanting. She didn't know who he was at the time. No one announced him, no spotlight, no photographs, no business card exchanged. But something about the way he departed, quiet and efficient, stayed with her. On Monday she began pulling threads. She cross-referenced the guest list with old archives. Bramble. That was the name someone had whispered at the periphery of a real estate meeting in Hilton Head. She searched public filings, one LLC after another, meticulously interconnected with impeccable paperwork and modest, deliberate actions. Then she discovered it. Bramble and Gray Partners, not ostentatious but potent, controlling over $5 billion in real estate capital focused on community revitalization projects, renowned in financial circles for being low-profile and high-impact. That was the individual Clarissa had brushed aside. The stark contrast struck her forcibly. A billionaire heiress celebrated for emblazoning her name across public ventures, unknowingly slighting the man who facilitated those projects. By Tuesday, Tilda had her framework. A misstep at a high-profile fundraiser, a silent financial withdrawal, a lesson in how influence doesn't always bear a name tag. She contacted Clarissa's office with a polite email. "We're running a story about changes in funding connected to the Van Duren Development Initiative. Would Clarissa like to provide comment?" No response. By Wednesday, Tilda had already spoken with 3 contacts in real estate who confirmed movement away from Van Duren projects. One off the record stated, "It's not a legal matter. It's a values issue." Quiet protest. That's when she solidified her angle. Power isn't merely inherited, it's earned. And when the two collide, only one commands the room. She didn't name Lennox in the initial draft. She didn't have to. The relevant individuals already knew. The rest would catch up. Her editor flagged one paragraph. When someone who signs the checks opts for silence over spectacle, you realize too late that the room you believed you owned was rented and the lease just expired. Tilda pushed back. Leave it. She wasn't crafting gossip. She was documenting a shift. For years, Charleston's elite had relied on names like Van Duren to confer credibility, but perhaps that era was diminishing. Perhaps it was time to pay closer attention to individuals who didn't arrive with fanfare, who didn't require their names in block letters to move mountains. Her story was published online late Thursday morning. The headline was concise. Behind the silence. Quiet exit reshapes Southern investment landscape. No scandal, no accusations, just a narrative subtly conveyed with just enough detail for insiders to connect the dots. The phone began ringing within 30 minutes. PR firms, investors, curious readers, even a call from a major development podcast inquiring if she would speak on record. She declined. She hadn't written the piece for renown. She wrote it because moments like that held significance. Because how you treat someone when you believe they are powerless reveals everything about the power you think you merit. But while readers were just beginning to grasp the ramifications of what had transpired, Clarissa was hours away from confronting it head-on in a room where nothing could be undone. Clarissa perused the article thrice before uttering a word. It wasn't brutal, it wasn't sensational. But it was calculated, and somehow that made it worse. No names were sullied, no secrets exposed. Just a quiet thread of truth interwoven with observation, and anyone in the industry could discern the unspoken meaning. Her phone vibrated on the desk. A message from her cousin in Asheville. Saw the piece. Everything okay? Clarissa didn't reply. A few more trickled in. Is this the kind of values realignment we should be concerned about? Thought you all had Bramble locked in. Are we still green-lighting Edisto or? It wasn't panic yet, but it was doubt, and doubt spreads faster than scandal in her world. She contacted her communications team. Damage control, she stated flatly. The head of PR, a young woman named Sloan with a crisis plan for everything from data breaches to boardroom disputes, suggested a soft statement, something that reinforces your commitment to community-driven initiatives, with language that... No, Clarissa interrupted her. We're not concealing ourselves behind platitudes. Sloan paused. Then what do you wish us to say? Clarissa didn't immediately answer. She wasn't sure anymore. She had built her brand on precision and refinement, but none of that applied now. She had alienated the man holding the foundation of her largest projects, and now the room had turned against her without raising its voice. Across town, Lennox sat in his office overlooking a tranquil stretch of downtown Savannah. No headlines on his screen, no press calls. He simply read the article and closed the tab. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He turned to Amira, who stood in the doorway holding a folder of pending partnerships. Do you think she read it? She asked. He nodded once. She felt it. Do you think she comprehends it? He paused. Not yet. Perhaps tomorrow. They proceeded to the next task. Meanwhile, the genuine cost was beginning to materialize. One of Clarissa's key banking partners suspended their quarterly review. Another requested a delay in final approval on the Edgefield initiative. Her name was still valuable but no longer invulnerable. Even her charity board began murmuring, not loudly, just sufficiently. She's always been sharp, one member remarked. But you know how that old money entitlement operates, someone else added. I mean, it's not just optics anymore, it's character. That word, character, troubled Clarissa more than anything because it wasn't about her investments. It was about her essence, her judgment. She dispatched a note to Barrett. I require a complete list of every stakeholder who has publicly acknowledged the article. No sugarcoating, no filters. By 5 p.m. Her name was trending by 5 p.m., not on national platforms, but on the industry's quiet internal networks. Investor circles, development consortiums, even a few minority entrepreneur groups were sharing the article with simple captions like, "This is what occurs when power is checked. Respect costs nothing. Disrespect can cost millions." It wasn't merely her funding that was fracturing. It was the image she had meticulously cultivated for years. Intelligent, capable, socially aware, philanthropic. That image now possessed a fissure running down its core, and the individual who caused it hadn't even raised his voice. Back in Savannah, Lennox concluded his workday. No press statement, no quote, no calls to boast or threaten. He didn't need to. His silence had resonated more profoundly than any interview ever could. Because the truth was, Lennox didn't wish Clarissa ruined. He simply didn't wish her rewarded. But for Clarissa to reclaim anything, she would have to confront something she wasn't used to, being incorrect and having no one around willing to embellish it into something more palatable. Clarissa arrived in Savannah just after 10 a.m., clad in her armor. Navy blue suit, pearls, and heels that clicked with determination across the tiled floor of the bramble and gray building. It wasn't glass and chrome like the offices she was accustomed to, no skyline panorama, no receptionist in designer footwear. The place was hushed, modern, with warm wooden floors, genuine bookshelves, and a single photograph of a redeveloped community center in Baton Rouge framed behind the front desk. She adjusted her blazer and checked her reflection in a wall mirror. Her expression appeared just right, composed, slightly resolute yet approachable. She had rehearsed this countenance before a camera for decades. A young assistant emerged from a side door. "Ms. Van Duren?" Clarissa nodded once. "Mr. Bramble will see you now." She followed him down a short hallway, her heels tapping against the hardwood. The room they entered contrasted sharply with her own office. No sculptures, no colossal desk, just two chairs facing each other and a small table between them with bottled water, 2 glasses and a closed folder. Lennox Bramble stood as she entered. No smile, no frown, simply standing. "Clarissa," he stated. "Mr. Bramble," she replied, extending her hand. This time he shook it. They sat. There was silence. Clarissa broke it first. "I came because I believe we began on the wrong footing." He waited. "I didn't know who you were," she added, attempting to maintain a professional, not apologetic tone. "That much was clear," Lennox said evenly. She took a sip of water. "I've been in this field a long time. I've collaborated with hundreds of people. Sometimes there are misunderstandings, Lennox tilted his head slightly. You consider it a misunderstanding? Clarissa didn't answer immediately. I think it was a moment taken out of context. He nodded slowly, not agreement, just acknowledgement. Then he leaned back. Allow me to pose a question, he said. If someone else had said that to me, someone without your name, your family, your wealth, would you be sitting here today? She didn't answer. Lennox continued, you didn't offend me. I've been mistaken for staff more times than I can count. What resonated with me wasn't the words. It was the ease with which you dismissed me. As if it wasn't the first time. As if it's how you navigate the world. Clarissa shifted in her chair. I didn't intend harm. Perhaps not, he said, but harm doesn't always seek permission. The air between them was still. She cleared her throat. I've forfeited partnerships over this. He nodded. So have others for less. I wish to rectify it, she stated. Publicly, privately, however it needs to be done. Lennox reached down, opened the folder on the table and slid a sheet of paper across to her. A single-page document, an internal summary of the projects his firm remained committed to. Her name wasn't on it. Clarissa scanned it, then looked up. So that's it. That's the redirection, he said. You declared in your speech you were here to invest in legacy. That's precisely what we're doing. Just not with you. Her jaw tightened, but she remained silent. He leaned forward, his tone still calm. You had an opportunity to construct something with individuals who didn't resemble you, didn't converse like you, didn't move in your circles, and you treated it as a favor. This wasn't a transaction for me. It was trust. Clarissa stood. She desired to utter something sharp, something to remind him of her identity, what doors she still commanded. But none of it emerged because deep down she knew those doors no longer swung as they once did. I wish you well, she said finally. He stood too. You as well, Clarissa. She exited the room without looking back. In the hallway, the assistant offered a polite smile, held the door, and ushered her out into the brilliant Savannah heat. But as she walked to her car, heels tapping across the sidewalk, she realized that the silence in that room wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. And it articulated everything she hadn't been prepared to hear. The subsequent week passed slowly for Clarissa, not because there were fewer calls. There were many. But because her responses came more deliberately. Each inquiry compelled her to contemplate differently than she was accustomed to. Have you considered how this impacts your long-term brand? Is there any intention to publicly reconcile with Bramble and Gray? Should we shift focus to another region? But none of those were the questions she continuously pondered, the one she repeatedly asked herself in private, when no one else could hear. Why didn't I just shake his hand? That moment replayed in her mind incessantly. The way he had stood there, polite, composed, extending something simple, and the way she had dismissed it, out of reflex, out of habit, out of something she wasn't proud to name. It wasn't about Lennox Bramble anymore, not entirely. It was about all the similar instances. People whose names she never learned, those she overlooked, those she filtered out of her reality because they didn't possess the correct introductions. Her entire career had been built on influence but not on relationships, not genuine ones. She had spent so many years in rooms where she was told she mattered that she ceased inquiring who else should. And now, people were observing not to see if she would rebound, but to see if she would comprehend what had initially caused her downfall. In a different part of the country, Lennox sat on a panel in Mobile, Alabama, addressing a room full of local organizers and young business leaders about ethical redevelopment. He kept his discourse concise, grounded, practical. When questioned about partnerships, he declared, "Character is always more paramount than capital. You can rebuild communities with good people and time, but you cannot restore integrity after it's compromised." Someone in the back inquired about Clarissa Van Duren. Lennox didn't evade it. She made a choice. I made mine. No vilification, no need for vengeance, just clarity. Back in Bluffton, Clarissa had begun walking more mornings. No phone, no headphones, just the sound of her own thoughts. Sometimes she caught herself scrutinizing the faces of individuals she had never before noticed. Servers, drivers, janitors, and wondering if they remembered her, not from fame but from dismissal. She made no public statements, she didn't need to. Her silence now wasn't pride, it was introspection. One morning she sat in her office and drafted a letter. Not for the press, not for her board, just for herself. A form of confession perhaps, A dissection of what she had lost and why it mattered more than the money. She wrote, "Respect doesn't stem from titles, it stems from presence. And I've spent too much of my life assuming mine held more significance than anyone else's." She folded it, placed it in a desk drawer and left it there. From the outside, Clarissa Van Duren remained a name. She still possessed property, connections, staff, invitations. But something had shifted, not audibly, quietly. The kind of shift that only manifests in the way people hesitate before returning your call, in the way your name is omitted from shortlists, in the way someone like Lennox no longer needs to explain why you are no longer part of the picture. A month later she attended a different fundraiser. Smaller, more localized this time. She arrived alone. She stood near the entrance, a glass of water in her hand, and observed a man enter. A stranger, sharply dressed, middle-aged, with serene eyes and no name tag. He walked past, offered her a polite smile. She stepped towards him and extended her hand. "Hi, I'm Clarissa." Because some lessons don't arise from scandal. They emerge from silence. And if you are fortunate enough to recognize the moment when it finally truly reaches you, you begin to act differently. You cease making assumptions about who people are, and you begin to present yourself as someone worth remembering. If you believe in accountability over appearances, respect over reflex, and the power of doing the right thing even when no one's observing, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are forthcoming.